In this episode, I host a dialogue between Dr. Ian Wickramasekera, Bön Buddhist practitioner and Associate Professor of Mindfulness-based Transpersonal Counselling at Naropa University, and Petra Tauchner, a student of the University of Vienna with a degree in microbiology and genetics, whose current bachelor's thesis in psychology is based on Dr. Ian's empathic involvement theory of hypnosis. In the first part of this interview, Dr. Ian gives an overview of the history of the mysteries and theories of hypnosis, lays out his own journey in formulating EIT, and discusses its implications for therapy and enlightenment. Then Dr. Ian and Petra dialogue about how to increase one's own hypnotisability, why empathy does not guarantee pro-social outcomes, and the very particular empathy skills of psychopaths, including a case study of Dr. Ian's own psychopathic client. Dr. Ian also recounts his own experiences practicing Dzogchen, meeting spiritual gurus, and taking ayahuasca, while Petra reveals her own passion for first-hand research, including a life-changing 21-day water fast, undertaken to reset her dopamine system. So without further ado, Dr. Ian Wickramasekera and Petra Tauchner. Dr. Ian Wickramasekera and Petra Tauchner, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. So glad to be here.
Hi, I'm so happy to be talking with you today. Thank you so much, Steve. Thank you so much, Dr. Wickramasekera, for taking your time. And yeah, I'm so excited to be asking you some questions later.
Wonderful, wonderful. I look forward to it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm so excited about this episode. Petra is a student at the University of Vienna, and she and her colleagues are working on a research project for their bachelor thesis about the relationship between cognitive empathy and hypnotisability, and they're using as their main explanation your theory, Dr. Ian, empathetic involvement theory, or EIT. And so in this episode, Dr. Ian has generously made himself available to discuss his theory here on the podcast and to dialogue with Petra about her research and her current thinking on questions about EIT in the field in general. And so in the first part of the interview, I'm going to ask Dr. Ian about EIT. And so we'll establish a good grounding in the theory and its history. And then I'll step back and Dr. Ian and Petra will begin their dialogue. And so I do want to say a big thank you to both Dr. Ian and Petra for agreeing to have this conversation here on the podcast. I'm so delighted for the two of you to meet, and I just can't wait to get started. All right. So first, Dr. Ian, I'd like to ask you about empathetic involvement theory. In your 2015 article, Mysteries of Hypnosis and the Self are revealed by the Psychology and Neuroscience of Empathy, which appeared in the American Journal of Clinical Hypnosis. You write about EIT. The EIT is a unified transpersonal theory of hypnosis in the self, which weaves together empathetic elements of Dzogchen, neodissociative, neuroscience, psychoanalytic, socio-cognitive, and other theories by proposing that hypnotic phenomena are inherently characterized by their deep involvement with processes of empathy and the self. And you go on to describe the two main, in that article, which I will link in the show notes, it's available for download at ResearchGate. You then go on to describe the two main theories of hypnosis in the following way. You write, researchers around the world have struggled for over 200 years to resolve a seemingly intractable debate about whether the nature of hypnosis is primarily a social, psychological related phenomenon, or rather a special state of consciousness based on advanced mind-body and/or neuropsychological talents. The debate started from the earliest times in the history of hypnosis and has been particularly vexing to resolve due to the impressive amount of evidence that each theoretical camp has produced. And you go on to say that any theory of hypnosis that wishes to resolve its central mysteries must at least account for and integrate these two strong traditions of hypnosis in some way. And then finally, you mentioned that I assert that these mysteries of hypnosis and the self can be explained by a close examination of how empathy and its embodiment in the mind and brain influence them both. So would you be so kind as to summarize your empathetic involvement theory, how it resolves those, as you put them, central mysteries of hypnosis, and also give us a sense as to how you arrived at the theory, which I think itself is actually quite relevant.
Yes, thank you. What a wonderful lead up to that question. Fantastic. Really, I feel I must have given you a lot of money or something to receive such a good question. Thank you. Good Lord. Well, I feel like you're right about many times it's easier to talk about this theory with some personal experience where I got a lot of my insights that I wanted to research and then proceed to the research, because the research is a very fantastic, powerful area of hypnosis research, but it involves the most paradoxical elements of human experience that most people do experience and discount. So, having said that, let me get to the easy thing I think most everyone can appreciate in their own life in some way. I first started thinking about relationship between empathy and hypnosis while I was in graduate school. And I had the great fortune to be doing a lot of work actually with my father and J. Catesby Ware and Alan Pope in different labs. And I was doing a lot of measurement of hypnotic ability, which is a really fun way to learn about hypnosis. Actually, is go and give these tests of hypnotic ability, like the Harvard and Stanford measures were the ones I was using the most. And they have these wonderful items on them of like amazing phenomena. Like you say to a person while they're in hypnotic trance, oh, there seems to be this message playing over announcement. And now a voice is starting and it is giving you an announcement and it is saying something to you. And then if the person is very gifted at hypnosis, sometimes they hear something, some kind of announcement, like, oh, I think there's a fire drill or something it's talking about. Or there's another one where you say, and you've been paying such close attention while we have been in hypnosis together that you probably haven't noticed this fly that's buzzing, flying around the room. And you've been paying such close attention in hypnosis, you never notice. But now that I draw your attention to it, you can hear this fly that's buzzing round and round your head, buzzing. Zzz, hear the buzzing. And it's really wonderful stuff. I can experience it myself, and I love it. Um, and I think it's quite wonderful that people have these mind-body abilities. It's really fascinating. But a central question arises about what kinds of people have this ability to experience this, positive and negative hallucinations, and be able to transform the experience of pain into joy, to be able to run faster, to be able to perform better as an athlete, to do so many amazing things and get over problems, simple problems of anxiety, depression, anger. Like, it's amazing. What are we to understand about these people that have this amazing gift? And one of the really amazing problems, which you read in the question, is that we have over 200 years of theorizing around at this point, actually well over 200 years of theorizing what kinds of people are good at this, but most of them are inaccurate. They're just totally wrong. It's like first, theories where it had something to do with biomagnetism, like your Darth Sidious shooting people with rays. Mesmer said this kind of thing, and I'm actually somewhat disappointed to report to you that in over 40 years of using hypnosis, not once did electric rays come out of me. I keep waiting. I would love for it to happen, but it's never happened. So it's not electric rays. Then there was, even by Benjamin Franklin, way back, in 1780s, came up with this idea. Maybe it had something to do with something like we might call suggestibility. And over the years, particularly when Bernheim came on the scene, someone developed, this guy named Hippolyte Bernheim, who was one of the teachers of Sigmund Freud, said, hey, yeah, maybe this has to do with, something like suggestibility. He actually had a different word for it. It was creditivité, but we needn't get into that too much. But it's something like suggestibility. But here's the problem. As early as the late 1920s, and then throughout the rest of the last century, there's just study after study that showed that there are people who are more suggestible than others. You know, like if they watch TV advertising or something like this, then they will buy the George Foreman grill. And if you go into the home, they have many products from the QVC shopping network. And there are people who literally are more suggestible than other people. And that's an interesting thing. However, those people are no more likely to be good at hypnosis than anyone else. Occasionally, some of them will be gifted at hypnosis, but some of them are actually pretty bad at hypnosis, even though they want to be. Like people have actually come to me saying, I'm a very suggestible person. I'm sure I'll be good at hypnosis. And I say, oh, good, let's see. And sometimes they're not. Sometimes they are, and sometimes they're not. It's very interesting. Suggestibility and or probably the most accurate way of saying this, the suggestibility that we find in hypnosis is not related to the suggestibility outside of hypnosis. So just being a suggestible person does not give you the kind of mind-body integration that is necessary to be really good at hypnosis. And so that was a really interesting thing. And, you know, there's other mysteries, you know, involving whether it's a state of consciousness that some people experience and other people don't. But even that is somewhat controversial, even at this point, because there are high hypnotizables who report never experiencing an altered state of consciousnness. I've even measured some myself, and they can do things with hypnosis that I can't, including surgical hypnosis. I'm like, I guess they know what they're talking about. You know, I'm the one administering it, but they're the one who's doing it. You know, and so if it's not altered state of consciousness per se, even though there's evidence they're involved for some people, and it's not suggestibility, and what the heck could this be? And so while I was measuring the hypnotic ability of all these hundreds of people for my dad and Alan Pope and Catesby Ware and other people that I was doing this work with, and later Ron Bacala at the VA Medical Center in Coatesville, I started thinking, you know, what is this, you know? And one thing that I noticed right on is that when you get someone who is a high hypnotizable, they have a very interesting kind of, yeah, I guess the personality is the right way to say this. They're very fun people. And they were far and away more fun to work with than the low hypnotizables. And that's even before the experiment started. Like what I noticed is that highs will come into the room and they're all like, oh, what is this about? What is this and that? You know, and interested in me. What is your name? How you get into this? And very sociable people. And low hypnotizables, some could be like that, but much less often. And I thought that was interesting, that they're just more affable and it was more fun to work with them. And I started thinking about that further. And right around the same time, I began to study client-centered psychotherapy, which was a very particular form of psychotherapy in which you attempt to use nothing but a pure relationship to help people. And the main thing that you do is to set a very close empathic environment with the person. And now, I had already been researching and using hypnosis on myself since I was 10 years old. I used to have migraine headaches. So when they told me that I was not to use hypnosis with people when doing therapy, I was like, oh, I don't know if I like this, you know. But the more I read the theory of Carl Rogers' writings about empathy and how beautiful it could be to help people using their own intuitive wisdom and love that they possess innately, and that is really his theory. You don't need to tell people what to do. You need to, you know, be like a mirror to them, let them see their own wisdom and love. And the more I read that, I started to feel guilty about using hypnosis, and I thought, you know, this is just maybe it's not necessary. And so, even though I'm still doing the research and you know, some clinical work for others, in my own cases, I actually gave up using hypnosis altogether. And I just tried to form this wonderful, close empathic relationship with people. And I found that it was amazingly effective, that just listening to people and fully validating what I had heard that they had said, that this allowed people to finally finish their own thoughts and to go deep into their own phenomenological experience in a way that they got deep healing. And after a while, I noticed something else, which was I was just going completely into trance. It's like I'd be with these people, and I would just feel like I was in this completely altered state of consciousness. Some of the ways that I noticed it was that, first of all, I would think that only half the session had gone by in about 30 minutes, and someone is knocking on the door and saying, hey, the room, this room, we have it next, because as a graduate student, I didn't have my own office. They're like, hey, you and your client got to get out. I was like, oh, whoops, And I was like, what happened? And so this time distortion is one of these classic signs of altered states of consciousness, not just in hypnosis, but in many other things like psychedelic research and other good, cool things that would be going on more often these days. But any kind of transpersonal experience, time distortion does arise sometimes as a sign of an altered state of consciousness. And so I thought, well, that's kind of weird. All I'm doing is just being empathic and like listening to people and trying to totally adopt their perspective as closely as I could and feed it back to them and just develop the most powerful interpersonal relationship that I could using empathy primarily, just my therapeutic empathy. And but then I thought, oh no, maybe I'm infecting, maybe I'm the world's most manipulative client-centered psychotherapist. So I had all these recordings, of my sessions. And I was actually studying with the person who ran Carl Rogers' own clinic that he established at the University of Chicago. His name is John McFerrin. He's a wonderful man, very wonderful. And so I thought, I would just admit it. I don't know how I'm doing it, but somehow I'm bringing hypnosis into my client-centered psychotherapy. Please arrest me, do something, cure me. I'm not meaning to do this, but somehow I'm bringing the hypnosis into the client-centered. And that, to me, at the time, at least in a fairly dualistic way of wanting to be the best client-centered guy I could be, I thought, I was doing something wrong, So I played the tape for John, and John is like, wow, this is really good. I was like, oh yeah, say some more. It's like, yeah, you guys are really close in there together. You're having these I and thou kind of movements that they talk about, moments that they talk about, like in existential psychotherapy, where people really feel very, very close. And this sounds very good to me. And then I was like, oh, really? It's like, yeah, this is good. It's a deep empathy. And so then I said to John, do you think it's a bad that I'm, having, time distortion? And do you think it's a bad? And so we talk about these things, and he says, it's causing you to miss things that the client says, and that maybe that would be bad. But he says, I don't hear that here. It seems like you're very close and hearing each other very, very deeply, and you're really kind of merging. And that's when I started to think, oh, wait a minute, maybe actually this is, empathy is related to hypnosis in some way. And I thought maybe it's possible to induce hypnosis just through empathy. And I thought that was, a pretty simple idea. Maybe there's some relationship. I didn't know particularly what, but then when I thought about my interactions with high hypnotizables, and I thought, oh, that's what it is. That seemed very empathic to me. They're so much more fun to hang with than many times lows, those are also fun to hang with. By the way, I will say there's a different flavor of why I like hanging with lows, by the way. I really enjoyed their critical thinking skills are much more they lean into. And the part of me that's a scientist, they really enjoy dialoguing. Like they'll ask me a million questions about what I'm doing in the experiment and things like that. And I love giving the answers because, you know, I read all this stuff and do the science myself. And so I enjoy that part of them too. But I will say that in terms of the social relationship, it's much warmer. And so I thought, well, if this isn't true, then I should do the experiment. Why not? You know, I'll just go ahead and do it. And so I did my first experiment around 1999. I start and then first begin publish in 2001. And what it was just simply, I had a good measure of hypnotic ability, the Harvard instrument. And then I had a nice measure of empathy, the one that, at least at the time, was the gold standard measure. It's called the Interpersonal Reactivity Index. And got a permission from Margaret Davis, who make this instrument. And he said, oh, this is very interesting. Why don't you do that? And so I got permission for him to use. And Harvard already had from Emily Orn in the hypnosis community. And then also I gave Tellegen absorption scale, which I thought we could use to kind of validate the same kind of correlations we usually see with absorption as a kind of check on experience. And I was also interested just offhand whether absorption might correlate with empathy as well. Because when absorption was created by Augie Tellegen, he used this very interesting word in the original article. He called it interpersonal absorption. And he thought that maybe there is something about the hypnotic relationship where there was a state of interpersonal absorption, which to me, I said, oh, that sounds like my therapy sessions. we're so absorbed in one another, we don't hear, you know, the knocking of the people you try to come into the room. A lot of my early therapy sessions took place in emergency rooms or medical offices where there were ambulances and terrible machines making horrible noises and sadly people dying, flatlining and code blues and things. And we could get so into each other that still we could work. So I'm thinking maybe this interpersonal absorption is a part of this too. Why don't I check that out? So I'll give these three measures. And lo and behold, they were all related. Closer analysis revealed that actually there are several items on the absorption scale that are very similar to items on the empathy scale, the interpersonal reactivity index. So I was like, oh, well, that makes sense. Of course, you know, you have similar items and there will be some overlap. Although, ironically, some of the stronger correlations weren't with the items on that scale. It was very interesting. So that was the first thing, and I went and published that. Subsequently, I began following up on this to see, you know, is there other ways that we could look at, is empathy related in some way to hypnosis and also absorption? And since that time, I think we did, oh my gosh, more than 10 studies of absorption and empathy. That finding is strange in that I almost always arrive at the same correlation. It's about 0.4. And so it's very interesting. A lot of them, it's 0.41. I don't know why it's 0.41, but you know, it's like, it's strange. But it's very similar in every study that I have all of those. And then also repeated, it's harder to measure hypnotic ability and empathy than it is to measure hypnotic ability and absorption. The reason why is you can just give paper pencil tests for absorption. We don't really have just a simple paper pencil test, at least at this point, that measure hypnotic ability. You have to actually do a live demonstration of the phenomenon, which I think actually is better anyways. I think it's better to have people really experiencing something. If I had a live test of empathy, also I would enjoy that more than what we're using, you know, because paper pencil tests are very much subject to people's ideas about themselves and how they want to present themselves, which is something that I'm always honest with, that, you know, because we have used some of these measures, it's always possible that the social context in which I do the experiments, or, you know, again, how people feel about themselves. Like I actually, when I first did this experiment, I did it with people who were, the subject matter, they were all fellow graduate students, you know, studying psychology and counseling. And so I wondered, would anybody actually rate themselves as being low in empathy? I thought, who's going to do that? And it's like, you know, it was not, you know, data's collected anonymously, but I thought, you know, no one's going to rate themselves as low. But I was wrong. There were some people who rated themselves as low, and oddly enough, just like I predicted, they were also low in hypnotic ability. And then there were lots of people who were in the medium range, and there were medium hypnotic ability. It wasn't a perfect, you know, 1.0 correlation, but it's, you know, about 0.3. So, you know, this is not like a strong correlation, but it's enough to show there's some relationship that's significant and worthy of further thought. So anyway, we continued, did many absorption studies just because those are easy to do. And they were also fun to see. We left the clinical psychology context entirely. Some of those studies were done actually on people who attend the Sturgis motorcycle rally. This is like this big outlaw biker event. I've never been myself, but my student, when he rode his Harley out and, you know, went around and found people to fill out the absorption and empathy instruments. Never got beat up for asking. That was a good thing. But he went out there and did it with that. We also did it with people who play the game Worlds of Warcraft. That was a fun one. Let's see, what else have we done? Medical school residents. Who else? Many different populations. Things that, people who practice equine assisted psychotherapy. So we did this, all different kinds of populations, not just clinical graduate students. And we get about the same correlation between empathy and absorption, which is about 0.4. So that seemed pretty interesting. And then we did replicate the finding with hypnotic ability. And subsequently, other people around the world very kindly, like Petra here, became interested in this theory, and particularly because it's testable. You can like actually use these measures and you can see. And so I was actually really happy when other people started testing this, because, you know, I wasn't sure. You know, maybe there was some weird way that I was communicating some kind of response expectancy that made people think they should fill things out, or there was some demand characteristic that I hadn't addressed adequately in my own research, and maybe other people wouldn't be able to replicate this finding. So I was, you know, wanted other people to do it, because, you know, honestly, the thing I love about science is not that it allows you to develop theory and you get known for a theory, and that's cool. You know, I mean, I guess there's a little bit of that if I'm honest, but I'm actually very much into the idea of testing truth fully, you know, and that as a meditator, I like to test all the theories of meditation that have been communicated by my teachers, as they've told me that you must try these methods out personally. And also, I believe as a scientist, why not empirically as well? We can examine things phenomenologically. Science is a search for the truth, and I feel like why not use any method of science, whether it be phenomenological, personal investigation, or whether it be, you know, deep empirical testing. I love both equally, and I particularly love measuring things that other people say you can't measure. So another study that I did in this line was to look at transference, because it used to be said that no one can measure transference until my good colleague Michael Nash at the University of Tennessee, he invented the world's first measure of transference, which for those of you who are not psychoanalytic, coming from Vienna, and probably you know about transference, but those who are not knowing transference, this was like Freud's and other people's idea that sometimes, whether we realize it or not, we relate to other people as if there was someone else very important in their life. Now, I'm saying this in a very atheoretical way because it's kind of the way I think of it. I did study psychoanalysis. I did 8 years of it personally, which I highly recommend. But I'm not a psychoanalyst. But I love the idea of that because that has been my experience. That sometimes in hypnosis, I actually experience the hypnotist as being someone else. First time I was hypnotized, I thought for sure the person hypnotizing me was this Italian neuroscientist named Gabriele Grattone at the University of Illinois that I studied with. He invented the world's first way of filtering EEG data. This is a real hardcore scientist of EEG. I was studying psychophysiology with him. And so I'm being hypnotized by this Icelandic guy, this really wonderful guy named Ole Paulsen. He studied in my dad's lab at the time that I was there, and I wanted to, experience the test myself. And then he administered the test to me, Ole Paulsen, who subsequently has become the world's leading expert in the use of hypnosis and irritable bowel syndrome. He has over 50 papers, maybe even over 100 papers at this point, documenting how hypnosis helps people with irritable bowel syndrome, also biofeedback and some other things, but mainly hypnosis. And so he's administering this test to me, and at some point it switched. I knew it was only inducing hypnosis in me, and then at some point it switched, and I thought for sure it was Gabriele Grattone. And we were joking earlier about accents. Icelandic accent and Italian accent, not at all similar. Not at all similar. And this is coming from a person who spent how long I spent? About 3 months in Italy. One summer, I won a scholarship to do archaeology in Naples area. And so I spent a long time in Italy. I know the difference between Icelandic accent and Italian accent, but in my mind, part of what sometimes is called trance logic, I apparently needed to hear it that way. And so I thought Gabriele Grattone was administering the hypnotic test to me. And when I opened my eyes, there's Ole, and I couldn't believe. I was like, wait, I thought, you were Gabriele. And I started thinking, how did I think that? Why did I think that? And I think it's because of what the psychoanalysts talk about, idealization. There is a tendency of people in hypnosis to idealize the hypnotist. And there's no doubt that studying with Gabriele Grattone, as I was in my undergrad years, was one of my favorite things. And he taught me so much about the study of EEG. This is around 1988, 1990s, and I studied with him. And so I think when I got into that, the part of that idealization, I just transferred onto Ole, and then he became Gabriele. This is so crazy. This actually was Freud's explanation of what hypnosis was. In the Dictionary of Psychoanalysis, he described hypnosis as a means of influencing people by transference. And so this all become very interesting in the later phase of my development of this theory, and we talk about hypnotic self elements of this theory. At any rate, so I also look at transference, and sure enough, transference related to empathy and hypnosis as well, as indeed Michael Nash found back in 1989 that his experimental measure of transference was also related to hypnotic ability as well. Doesn't mean everyone experience transference in hypnosis, probably not. The correlation is again about 0.3, but some people seem to experience, and I'm one of them. I'm not ashamed. I know a lot about transference also from my years of experiencing and practicing psychoanalysis too. But so all of this became interesting to me in thinking about how are we to weave these findings together with the two major theories of hypnosis at the time that I was interested in, which were an altered state theory of hypnosis called a neo-dissociation, and then also the social psychological theories around such suggestibility, which still to this day would be best theory, at least for my money, response expectancy theory from Professor Irving Kirsch. What a wonderful man and a great scientist. I think probably one of the best scientists I've ever known, because he's willing to accept the results of experiments that contradict his own theory. But it's another story we needn't get into. And also, he's just a wonderful person to have drinks with, I will say here. But at any rate, I was thinking about these two theories and how does this relate to empathy? And I started thinking about first neo-dissociation a lot, because I'm thinking about what I experienced with, like in this experience of transference, of actually seeing Gabriel Graton on Ole Paulson's face. Because even when I came out of trance, I kept seeing Gabriel Graton's, furrowed brows a little bit, on Ole, and I have totally different color hair, a guy from Iceland and a guy from Italy with jet black hair, at least at the time. I started thinking, how does something like this occur? Yeah, I was just thinking about this. And I started looking into the neurological understanding and the neuroscience of empathy. And it's when I started to discover how similar the brain processing and also the what we call autonomic neuroscience, the autonomic nervous system are. So for instance, maybe we'll start with the brain, a little easier to maybe start here. We know that in both hypnosis and in empathy, there are a number of brain regions that share a lot of importance. In particular, the default mode network. Default mode network in hypnosis, actually this allows me to talk about Irving Kirsch, was first discovered to have something to do with hypnosis, default mode network, ironically by accident, by Irving Kirsch. He was attempting to establish an experiment that would disprove that hypnosis had an altered state of consciousness associated with it. I was actually at the conference where he announced these results. And the funny thing was, the person who was doing the fMRI results was just coming to the conference with the results freshly analyzed. So Irving didn't know himself when he started the presentation what the results were, but it was thought that she would arrive and say what they were. And he was thinking that there wasn't going to be any, unique neural results for the state of hypnosis. And instead she arrived and she has this look on her face like, it's like, no, go ahead, say what they are, no matter what, If there's nothing, there's nothing. If there's something, there's something. This is why I was saying earlier, I find him to be the best scientist I've met. His scientific integrity is can't be questioned. I mean, even it's amazing. So then she says, actually, yeah, there is a neurological index of the state of hypnosis, and it's default mode network. And then I immediately was like, oh my God, and then everyone thought, oh, he's probably going to try and spin this in a bad way. And instead he said, well, if that's the result of the experiment, that's why we're scientists. That's why we do these experiments. And, this is coming after, 30 some years of theorizing about how hypnosis has nothing to do with altered state of consciousness. And it's all about social expectancy, social psychological theories. So I thought, good Lord, that's very interesting. So even the person who thought that has nothing to do with an altered state has now demonstrated this. And then subsequently, a lot of other people replicated that result, even in Japan. So it's all around the world, people have found this. Default mode network is actually indexing hypnosis as a special state of consciousness. And similarly, people have speculated that the default mode network has a lot to do with empathy. And in particular, that the default mode network itself is a representation of our experience of self. Now, there's a whole variety of experiments that get us to that point, which are a little complex, so I'll maybe just say that. And if you want to read more about why that is the case, the default mode network has something to do with the experience itself, then you can read my paper. But we'll just say now that, like, when you're having an experience of who you are, like it is me now, Ian, using these hands, you know, telling you the story of my life, that we have a whole region of brain structures that are involved in giving me this experience. That it is I, Ian, who is telling you the story, while Steve is in his boat with all these cool books, and there's Petra in Vienna, which I've never visited. We really like to someday. And so there's all this thoughts about who we are and then who other people are. And in empathy research, I have speculated that part of empathy is about creating alternate states of the default mode network for other people. So I have a representation of who I am right now, which is the Ian talking about my empathy research. But also there's an Ian who is a daddy, and is called Daddy. It's actually not so much anymore. Now he's just called Dad. And also there's me, who was a long time ago a rock and roll singer, you know. And then there was the me who has done a tremendous amount of contemplative study, and spent a lot of time studying with the Tibetan Rinpoches and Nepalese and Bhutanese people, learning their traditions. And you know, some of these different parts of me have even different names. You know, like when I was young, I had this name Edster. Because my middle name is Edward. And so the notion is that also we're doing the same thing. Like I have some idea of Steve, because we spend now many hours talking very kindly in interviews, and allow me to relay some of the wisdom and love I've learned, particularly from many Tibetan teachers. And then now talking about the amazing wisdom lineage of hypnosis, which is the oldest of all the psychological lineages in the you know, Western world, so to speak. You know, we go back even before the development of psychology. Even first real book, you know, written 1819, Abe Faria, you know, on the causes of lucid sleep. At any rate, so I just really started thinking, you know, like maybe what's happening here, you know, that we have default mode network activity is a strong index of empathy, as well as you know, creating empathic selves and understanding of other people, so that it's the weirdest thing, right? It's like we think we are living in reality, right? But you know, research on the default mode network shows that, you know, this hand, you know, I'm not experiencing directly even a pound into my head. This is real. This is real. But what am I experiencing? The aspect of the default mode network in the parietal cortex, the somatosensory cortex, gives us the experience of a bodily self, which is like one of these funny things in the contemplative traditions that talk about no body, no mind, you know, that you don't really have, you know. You only will have representation of a hand. And what's so strange about it is, nevertheless, we are strongly fixating on this illusion of a bodily self. And but also there's the illusion of an autobiographical self, you know, a narrative self. And that part comes from the part of the default mode network. It's a region of brain structures that create the experience of self. It comes from hippocampus and other areas involving autobiographical memory. And so, you know, I had the story of who I am. And in fact, there are many stories of different variants of me, you know. I really started to understand how much a hypnosis is involved in maybe even just a side effect from actually, the psychology is samsara that we would talk about in the contemplative literature, that there is an illusion of self. We don't exist in reality directly. We only have, representation like this. I'm looking at my, and not looking, I'm feeling my somatosensory cortex. That's what I'm really feeling. Feels good. and at the same time, also the ability to dissociate. Everyone says, "Oh, dissociation, the most amazing thing ever." Like, how can you not feel something that you should feel? But who is feeling the socks on their feet before I said that? Who's heard this? I mean, maybe if the spider was in your shoe, then you did feel, or who is feeling the shirt on your back before I said it? We're masters of dissociation. We never live in reality, ever. Never once. You were not even born into reality. We had a very wonderful dissociative ability built into our somatosensory cortex. Because who cares what your socks feel like? Use your neural processing for other important things, like, trying to manipulate your phone and drink your water. It's really a principle of limited processing is embedded in the general cognitive model of mind. They sometimes call this the limited processing model. Your brain cannot process everything, so we don't experience reality directly, because most of reality is fairly boring. Like if you're looking in my background, you will notice there is this Tonka there, which I kind of intentionally put there, but also then there's like the bookshelf with some CDs and books on that. But until I started saying that, right, were you really like looking at that, like, oh, what kind of CDs are those? Is a classic rock there, or is it goth or EDM? What's there? You don't think these things. We don't pay attention to everything. We don't live in reality directly. We live in experience of reality. And so this became a very important thought for me about how this theory was developing. I thought, if this all has to do with the creation of the self, and how hypnosis is just simply utilizing the normal processes that we are utilizing to create our experience of self anyways, then this is really the magic of how samsara is created through hypnotic processes that we were using all the time. You're using dissociation all the time. Now, is it true that because you have this ability, you should be able to use it anytime you want without having to train the ability more? It doesn't seem to be the answer. It seems like anyone can learn to use more, but it takes us some training to really use more and more skillfully. But innately, I have trained people, even very low hypnotic ability, to utilize hypnosis to, in particular, overcome chronic pain, which is a lot of what I'm doing. I'm working with people who, in some cases, have pain that has no body at all. I work with people with phantom limb pain. So it's very easy to say that they don't live in reality, because in their reality, one time I worked with a guy with phantom tongue pain. It's very strange. Like what happened with him was he's in a car accident, and he's like yelling out, "Ah!" And then at the moment of impact, and it severed the tongue. Here's another illusory resident, Mr. Shen the cat. And he had no tongue, and the doctor brings him to me and says, we cannot treat his pain. His tongue is on fire, and even we give opiates, it make him feel a little better, but the tongue is still burning and really bothering him a lot. And so I thought, okay, yeah, I know how to do this. I work many times with people with phantom pain from amputation of toes and feet from diabetes. And that feel like they have foot, but no foot is there. But still, and they know that. They can go and touch and feel their stump, and they can touch the prosthesis, And then they say, yeah, but still they feel, and so then this man, talk about his tongue pain. And then I ask him how this happened. And he say, his brother and him in car with they just, both of them had just gotten engaged, and also um, their what they call the brides to be in the back seat. And they're all in this car celebrating. They all just newly got engaged. And the guy got drunk and drove right off a large hill, and all of them die. And he's the only one that lived. And he heard several of them die, gurgling blood and all this horrible thing, their body crushed. And he's feeling horribly guilty this happened. And I asked, what does the pain feel like? It feels like my tongue is on fire and there are twisting blades just twisting over and over. And you talk about, but he deserved this because he killed his brother, his bride to be, and also his brother's bride to be. And so then I start to think, which maybe, I can see by the look on your face, what a horrible situation of this man is in. I think it's a phantom tongue pain. It has a lot to do with his guilt and the trauma. And so I use hypnosis and EMDR paired together to help him to, come to terms with this horrible trauma, where he felt like he didn't deserve to have a good life. He was constantly thinking that he should kill himself, And he came to a different realization after treatment that maybe he should devote his life to making others better and helping others with alcoholism that he had, and some other substance abuse he had. He is addicted to heroin. Another reason why he didn't want to use the medication they're giving him. And once that part of it was cleaned up, then what happened is very easily, can just say, well, let's actually pay attention to this tongue. The one that's on fire. I need just to pay attention. And then I do a very tricky thing. I said, I want you to increase the pain. It's like, it's terrible. I don't want to do that. I was like, no. But just for a little bit, increase the pain. Make it worse. Make it burn worse. It's sharper metal. Terrible. It would like wreck your tongue and blood fly everywhere. And it's like, oh, it's horrible. Okay, good. Now dial it back a little bit less than usual. Okay, now keep it going as far as you can. It's gone. Oh, this is one of the secrets of chronic pain, is make people increase first. I don't know why, but intuitively, it's much easier to make worse than, and then if you know you can make worse, then you can make it better. Well, all of that, just trying to give an illustration of this, that we don't live in reality. We feel that we have this body, we feel that we have even this identity in this mind, but in reality, they don't have a unified self. And that was the major conclusion of Ernest Hilgard in his neo-dissociation research. It's actually exact quote goes something like, the illusion of a unified self is a attractive one, but does not hold up upon examination. And I just love this because this is the same statement coming from Buddhism and Bön and many other mystical traditions about the nature of self. And we feel that we have a self that lives in a reality, but what we have is a representation of that. And actually, neo-dissociation really showed how people have multiple selves. Normal people, not just people with with the dissociative identity disorder, multiple personality disorder, some people know as. We all have these things. Like I said earlier, there's a default mode network of me. That's this guy is talking to you now. And sometimes you've seen me kind of go into, I don't know, my trickster-like self, I guess. Sometimes you've seen me talk about being daddy, or was a minor rock star for a little while. Very minor. Very minor. Only people knew me in Japan. and someplace in Eastern Europe where they play our band.
Japan is the second largest rock industry in the world.
Oh, well, then,
so
okay, yeah.
That's not minor at all.
Well, thank you. You know, no, never a concert invitation has arrived yet, but maybe someday. But I don't know. It's like this. Everyone has multiple selves. We're not this one person. And actually, all of these are equally empty. They're all just autobiographical selves. And there's so much more. Like sometimes when people talk about the emptiness of self, it sounds like this really bummer thing. Like, oh my God, you ain't nothing. Like I remember someone has written this wonderful book. It's actually a really good book about Buddhism. It's called Being Nobody, Going Nowhere. I just love that. It sounds like so insulting to the narcissistic self. And that's really what we're talking about here, is that kind of fixation on who we think we are. How narcissistic is this, you know? And it's amazing like how narcissistic we can get in trying to embellish our lives with, you know, artwork on my wall. Many books, you know, and with Thai from Bhutan, and long hair that I'm so glad I still have at age 51. You know, all of these are fixations on who we think we are, but they, you know, they're just illusions. You know, they're just, I should say, the quality in which I'm using the word illusory often confuses people. So here I'm not talking about illusion versus reality in a dualistic way, and it's really more talking about fixation and grasping. Because really what creates the suffering is not so much that we have the illusion of ourselves, is the way I understand it, but it's more about how we fixate on it, like needing to be me. It has been the cause of so much suffering in my life. And I even like things that I don't want to be me, I get fixated on. Like for a long time, I was very addicted to smoking. You know, I thought I am a smoker. I grew up in a rural place. I started smoking at the age of 12. I enjoyed it. It was wonderful. I occasionally still have relapses, I'll be honest. But I was so fixated on thinking I am a smoker that it never occurred to me I could quit. And yet, at the age of 30, I did quit. You know, I have a relapse here and there. I'm not smoking 2 packs a day like I used to, you know. And the biggest obstacle to me in thinking that I could not be a smoker was thinking I am a smoker. And so even things that we don't like about ourselves, we fixate on them. That's what the quality of illusory I'm talking about, the idea that we are just one person. And I believe that that feeling of wholeness, this is the hallmark of the illusion of hypnosis, that we can learn to use this magic to actually transcend that illusion and work skillfully with it. Like sometimes in the, Vajrayana and Dzogchen traditions of Tibet and other Himalayan places, they talk about gurus have these skillful means that can like zap you with stuff, you know. And I believe most of that is using the magic of expectancy and neo-dissociation. So we cover the neo-dissociation side of this. The social psychological side of this is much easier to say, which is that they're totally right. Expectancies do have something to do with how we experience hypnosis. The evidence for that is extremely strong. So many different studies show that if you give people task instructions around what the nature of hypnosis is prior to people's experience of hypnosis, it will actually tend to experience some people But interestingly enough, not all people in that direction. One of the studies that really impressed me early on was task instructions about what we call post-hypnotic amnesia. And so studies showed that if you tell people before a hypnotic experiment that the classic sign of hypnosis is not being able to remember hypnosis afterwards, then the experience of people spontaneously experience, so-called spontaneously experiencing that not being able to remember hypnosis afterwards is greatly increased. Is it everyone? No, but it's increased significantly. And so there are so many experiments like this where they give task instructions about what hypnosis will be like, and then they see, do people experience that? And the result in every case is inevitably more people are experiencing the thing that they suggested goes with hypnosis otherwise. That's just one line of research that's easy to talk about in their field. And so my feeling is, who are these people that actually are influenced by task instructions in hypnosis and who can develop response expectancies? Who are they? I think they're people with empathy. That's what I think, you know. One time I asked Irving Kirsch himself, and also Steve Lin, I was like, do you think response expectancies are beamed directly into people's heads? Do you think you just thinking that they, should have more hypnotic amnesia after the experiment is enough? You have to say something, and they have to hear it, and they have to interpret it, and bring it into their own experience of self and experience of the world. And so that is how I believe this theory has actually woven together the altered state traditions with the social psychological work in an empirical way, that we have shown actually empathy has something to do with these things. Also, we know the neuroscience of empathy, which only we talked about the brain part of it, but there's autonomic and endocrine thing. So I'll just review a few things. One of the primary things in the autonomic area is what we call cardiac variability, and so we know that in both hypnosis and empathy, you can see that there is an increase in cardiac variability when that experience is happening of intimacy. And then also, most amazingly to me, is a study done by Richard Bryant on oxytocin. So oxytocin is one of these neurohormones, so to speak, that we know is involved in intimacy. Indeed, you can give to conflictual couples, and then they'll seem to help actually them to do work in couples therapy. It's very interesting. However, Richard Bryant did a study where they administer nasally, they give the oxytocin in a kind of like nasal device, this spray, I guess, of some sort. I don't actually quite understand, but they administer nasally, and then it actually increased people's hypnotic ability as well. Very interesting. So there are many things about the neuroscience, and then the phenomenology and just basic research in hypnosis that both I and many other people have done. And subsequently, people followed up on my stuff, like David Terhune, at Oxford, followed up on my thing. And he got similar results. Burkhard Peter and some of the German people also, they follow up too and come to similar ideas. And there's been other kinds of replications and this kind of thing. And to me, I feel like this will solve that first mystery, which is, what is this an altered state? Is this social psychological? It is both. And there are different kinds of people, and there are, some people definitely deeply influenced, empathically by hypnosis. And some people also get very different altered state things from this. However, not everyone. And I think, again, this has something to do with unique differences in empathy really predict this. And I'm very interested in just in general with that. But also, I feel like this work really revealed to me what the nature of hypnosis was. Nature of hypnosis in the experience of the illusion of self. This, we've known many years, that experience of self has a lot to do with empathy. In fact, that is a Carl Rogers' main theory of why we suffer in life. It's because we have empathy. It says if you didn't have empathy, then you would not suffer the same way. It says you are experiencing a state of mind called incongruence. And this comes from, like, when we hang out in the world, we learn people like certain things and they don't like others about us and who we think we are. And so we like tune certain things out and then we tune other things in. People like my long hair. How wonderful. Actually, that's not even true, but I like it. I'm very attached to this. I've revealed many times. And so a lot of times, yeah, we have these feelings like some people don't like this thing about me. Just to be honest, one of the things I didn't like about myself growing up was that I'm not white. And I'm fairly, fair complected for Sri Lankan boy, but I didn't like that growing up. I didn't. I wished I looked like all the rest of the, country boys that live around me, and why did I have to look different and this kind of thing? And so what was making me think that? My damn empathy. I was like, God damn it. I love this empathy. And also, I create this experience. I am different than the other people. I'm not as good as them. They are better than me. That's kind of simplifying how I thought about it, but it's very interesting. I create this whole experience of myself that I then fixated on, and then also I'm a smoker and all kinds of things I didn't like. I'm an anxious person. I started to become very anxious and thought I was less good as people who had more confidence. And it's like I had this whole theory of who I was that I was so fixated on that was just horrible. It's like I thought I had a broken brain at that point. It's just absolutely terrible to fixate on yourself that way. Totally unnecessary. I had lots of friends who would tell me, you're not that way, but that's, how I was. I was just glad I had some friends, actually. And so, this social psychological aspect of hypnosis is very profound, both in the experiments, but also, I think, in reality. We're walking around creating ourselves based on the empathic feedback that we get from other people. Everyone is holding a mirror to us. Some people are a little more kind with how they hold that mirror, and some show you the whole thing, that's really good. And others, we have this more conditional relationship where we're not going to go the whole way, It's one of the great highlights of working with, I think, very powerful teacher in contemplative traditions, or a very good, client-centered psychotherapist, that they will show you the whole mirror. Actually, I wrote a paper on this too for John McFerrin, and the guy I was talking about earlier, comparing how a good client-centered psychotherapist is like a good guru that will show you the whole mirror of who you are, and that that's enough hypnosis to alter you. But anyway, that's a kind of maybe two main aspects of my theory. In summary, are that hypnosis is an inherently empathic laden experience, which we tend to adapt to the expectations, bodily postures, and many other aspects of things that are suggested to us in hypnotic suggestions, imagery. It will say, think of this, picture yourself in a boat on a river with tangerine trees and marmalade skies. You start thinking this. You have to do that. You have to use your empathy in order, in a social psychological way. Empathy also involved in how we alter the experience of self. in the way neo-dissociationists have discussed. Yeah. So maybe those two things. And then the thing that I build on top of this is understanding that this is not just about hypnosis. This is about how we are creating the self, not just in hypnosis, but at all times. And so this led to, my kind of second tier theory that I sometimes call the hypnotic self theory, that the self is actually created by the same processes that by which hypnosis works. And the hypnosis is simply a special case of the normal psychology of how we create fixations and illusions of self and, for that matter, the world. And in my most recent article in International Journal of Clinical and Experimental Hypnosis goes much more into this idea of the Dzogchen tradition of Tibet and other Himalayan places, and how it relates to hypnosis, and that both reveal to us the nature of the illusory self and illusory world. I think those are the two main things. And I thank you for your patience, because Lord knows I've been talking a long time, and I love this stuff so much. I would go on talking even longer, but I feel it would not be good.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ian, for that very thorough summary. And of course, for more detail about that method and the evolution of your thinking, there's really quite a lot of papers. I think 41 papers available on ResearchGate, most of which are available to read in full. For the most part. So, and I'll link that down below. And I also ought to mention that we've covered some of that detail, particularly your latest paper in our interviews, the previous episodes we've done together, your paper about Dzogchen and hypnosis, and also the paper about client-centered therapists and the Kalyana Mitra, or the spiritual friend or the guru. We went, I think, into that paper in some depth in another interview also. So I'd refer people to those interviews if those themes have piqued your interest. But now let's hand things over to the second part of the interview. Petra, perhaps you could tell us a little bit about your interest in EIT, the current research you're doing for your bachelor's thesis, and also what questions have arisen out of that for Dr. Ian.
Yeah, so we actually are interested in the correlation between hypnotizability and cognitive empathy, which is only one facet of the many facets of empathy. Yeah. And we assume that the better a person's cognitive empathy skills are, the more likely they will respond to hypnotic suggestions. And now this brings me to my first question. Since empathy is such a multidimensional construct and the main factor of your theory, there have been several studies that showed a moderate positive relationship between empathy and hypnotizability. However, there's also been one recent study by Scacchia and De Pescalis from 2020 that found no correlation.
That's right, yes.
Yeah, and you mentioned in your paper, Mysteries of Hypnosis and the Self are Revealed by Psychology and Neuroscience of Empathy, that hypnosis could be described as something like an enhanced state of empathy. Now, that got me thinking of people with low empathic abilities, like psychopaths. And according to your theory, would that imply that people incapable of experiencing empathy, like psychopaths, should also be incapable of being hypnotized? And also, do you have any experiences in your clinical and your research work with using hypnosis on psychopathic individuals? And maybe you could also hint on that, but do you think there's a difference when speaking of effective versus cognitive empathy in relation to hypnotizability?
Yeah, this is an area where I feel I'm so glad people, first of all, let me say thank you for being interested in this and for following up on it. And whatever you find or anyone else finds in the same spirit of the sacredness of, I believe, science and searching for the truth, whatever you find, I will be very excited to see whether it support my idea or not. These are more like fun games, we're playing with the truth and trying to understand. So whatever you find is good. And also, you mentioned this recent Italian study, which is very interesting to me. They did not find a replication. And so I found that interesting. One thing I would say, however, is there's a problem with this study from my point of view. They also measure absorption, and they did not also find a correlation with hypnotic ability and absorption. That is a dramatic difference. And we have, like, you know, since 1974, I don't even know how many hundred studies, you know, show a relationship between absorption and hypnotic ability. Sometimes that correlation is very small, you know, like it's interesting, you know, sometimes that correlation be like point, remember that John Kilstrom did one, I think it was like 0.15 or 0.2 or something, but it was so many hundreds of people, it was still significant. And then sometimes it's a very high number, you know, like point, I don't remember the highest I've ever seen, but, you know, I certainly in my studies about 0.4, it's 0.3, this kind of thing, difference. But in that study, not significant at all. And so what I wonder is there was perhaps some unintended response expectancy that the instruments would not be related to the instrument at all, like they unintentionally did this. Because if it had just been the empathy instrument, then I wouldn't say anything. But the fact that there is no relationship with absorption, you know, contradicts, you know, many decades, well, not many, but three or four decades of hypnosis research on empathy and hypnosis. So I don't know if that's a right or wrong, but it's worthy of further investigation, because that's very strange that absorption not. However, now you also brought up an area that I've thought a lot about, which has to do with what kind of empathy may be going with this. So that is interesting, you know. I only used the interpersonal reactivity index at the time, you know, just wanted to use what at the time was regarded as the highest, most psychometrically sound measure, multi-dimensional measure of empathy that there was. And so I didn't particularly deeply understand the 4 different scales at the time, and not really thought too much about like which of these might go the most with empathy. I did make some hypotheses, and the hypothesis was actually the perspective taking scale, and that was mainly based on that there was, you know, some content overlap between these scales and absorption. And I thought, well, absorption's pretty reliable correlate, you know, maybe this too. And then actually empathic concern scale, the emotional empathy one. So empathic concern, this is generally defined by Mark Davis and, you know, other researchers of the IRI to be the tendency to feel warm feelings when we hear the stories of suffering of another person. Like someone says to you, well, just recently I had many sad stories told me about shooting here in Colorado. And a woman I knew, a wonderful woman named Alana, she was a shot in this, and she's a wonderful woman who, in the psychedelic community here. Here in Boulder, we have a large psychedelic research community and people having fun at festivals, and I met her at many festivals, and really wonderful woman. And someone tells me about her dying, and I had this feeling like, it's a terrible loss to think about. Someone so kind and giving so much to so many people, create a business out of psychedelic culture. Yeah, this is gone. You know, and you hear this story and you start to feel there's a feeling of compassion. You know, that's what we call empathic concern. It's kind of emotional one. Perspective taking, the scale that you're interested in, it's also my original hypothesis as well. The tendency to see things from other people's perspectives, and to like some of the items talk about walking a mile in another person's shoes, you know, really before making the thought, you know, about another person's judgment. And so this very much ties up theoretically, like with the, you know, Irving Kirsch's stuff, response expectancies, because again, there's never been, I pointed this out, a number of times at conferences playfully, there's never been any explanation of how response expectancies are communicated socially. Like there can't be, I don't know, maybe we do have some kind of Wi-Fi, we're beaming directly into the brain. Maybe Mesmer was right, and I just don't know how to make the rays shoot. Or maybe they're happening and I don't see them. I don't know. Maybe they're in a different spectrum of light. I don't think so. I think it's more empathy, and so I think perspective taking is really promising. But I will say that empathic concern actually had larger correlation than perspective taking in my original study. And I don't know if that's really the deal, to be honest. I feel like there needs to be more work to really look at this. I feel like both aspects of empathy have something to say, possibilities here to research. One of the things that I have become more and more interested in, though, is trying to get beyond the paper and pencil test. And really looking directly at measures of empathic behavior directly and correlating those with measures of hypnotic behavior directly. The reason I like this idea is that and now, especially like on the internet, there's all this stuff about I'm an empath, and mostly I read that, I think they're saying I'm a hypnotizable, and I don't know it yet, or I don't know, I really think this, I think that's what, I'm actually very interested in those people for that reason. They're very good people to study. And a lot of them show up at my school, Naropa University, Well, I don't know how many, we may have like one low hypnotizable in every class if we're lucky. Mostly we have like 30% highs and, rest average, and maybe one token low somehow finds their way into our classrooms. We're a very transpersonal institution. But I'm very interested in this question. So I'm so glad you're looking at it. And I would encourage maybe to use all full scales of the IRI if you have the ability to do that, because there may be other instruments and you may only be able to use one scale. But since there have been correlations with absorption and empathy, both for empathic concern, emotional empathy, and perspective taking, I think it might be best if you could use both. However, whatever you can do will be very interesting to me. The other two scales, on the IRI are also of some interest, but I've never seen anything empirical yet. So the other one, one is called personal distress, and this one I thought very interesting. I do a lot of work also clinically, and then also interest research-wise in the placebo effect. So personal distress is the tendency that when you see another person suffering, that you experience that suffering directly. It's very interesting. Like, I'll give you a funny example. I saw this movie one time with my girlfriend at the time, and we was watching this movie, and we were sitting in the front row because it was the last seats left. And as part of this movie, it's called The Perfect Storm. There's this scene in the movie where they're on the boat and the big storm is coming, and they're trying to catch a bunch of fish before the storm comes. And instead of catching a fish, they catch a gigantic shark, and the shark jumps on the deck and starts sliding. The boat is going up and down from the storm, and they're sliding down the deck, and the shark is coming down with the mouth closing like this. And I found myself like up in my chair, like, oh my God, let's get away from the shark. I really felt like this was happening to me. Like, I might be bit by this big, I don't know, it was mako shark or what kind of shark it was. There's a lot of teeth. And then I realized I was doing it, and I look over at my girlfriend, and she's doing it too. And I was like, oh, good, another high. How wonderful. But so that is like a personal distress. I have not seen this, but I sometimes think there may be some merit there too. Other scale is the fantasy scale, and that actually has also some relation too. But the two that really show the most in my studies have been perspective taking and empathic concern. I recall now maybe someone else, I don't know if it was Devin Terhune or someone else, when they were looking at this a different way, maybe in Devin's study, I don't remember now, where they were looking at this in terms of unconscious mimicry, which is another phenomenon of empathy that's actually was talked about even by Clark Hull in his original scientific book on hypnosis. The first real scientific book on hypnosis written by Clark Hull, called Hypnosis, a Scientific Approach, like in 1929, if I remember correctly. And in it, he actually invented an apparatus for measuring people's tendency to mimic other people's body language. Yeah, he actually had an instrument that would do that. It's really cool to see this very clever way of measuring people's, what he called postural sway. So like, as I come forward like this, then maybe we'll all be like this, you know? I was like, oh, what are we talking about here? I used to do this when I was in psychoanalysis. I would make this body movement like this with my analyst, you know? And I would see eventually, because he was very empathically attuned, he would start to do this too. And then I would push it how far I could go. I would start to go like this. Then I would go like this, you know, and then he would catch himself. He's like, stop that. This wonderful constructivist psychoanalyst, his name was Louis Boucher, very wonderful analysis I had with them. So good. At any rate, so I would say that. And then the third thing you ask about psychopaths. And so I actually have a different take on this, which is that I don't think psychopaths actually are devoid of empathy. I think what they're devoid of is emotional empathy. And they may have a kind of emotional empathy, but it's not one that people generally like to talk about. It's Schadenfreude, the ability to experience other people's suffering as pleasure. So if you look at most empirical definitions of empathy, they don't always refer to a pro-social outcome. And I believe that's what's going wrong in these people. I did treat one time a person who I think could very comfortably, I would say, had this sociopathic tendencies. He came to me. Ironically, it's my first client ever. And the teacher says, yeah, why don't you see this guy? He's got really bad empathy. I mean, really bad anxiety is what they said. And so I go into the room with him. And because it was a student clinic, we were actually so close that our knees would touch at times. It's a very small room, you know. And he's wearing these sunglasses. And I thought it's because he's anxious, you know, just anxious person. And I could actually, there were mirrored ones. So I could see my own face in the reflection of his glasses. And he did not seem anxious at all to me after talking. In fact, I was very intimidated by him. And it seemed like he likes to make me feel intimidated. And I'm just trying to do client-centered work with him. So one of the things in client-centered is you have to tell people how you're feeling yourself. The 3 values of client-centered psychotherapy are unconditional positive regard, whatever a person says, you're positive. Empathic stance, you use primarily empathy to relate to them, but also transparency, congruence. So eventually I had to tell him, it's like, actually, it was maybe second session, I said, I know you told my supervisor you were anxious, but you've not talked about it yet. And I asked, and you don't actually seem anxious, you know. It was like, am I missing something, you know? And then he said, now I'm going to tell you actually why I'm here. I was like, oh, okay. Why are you here? You know, he told me had horrible fantasies of killing people. And he's a truck driver, and he was fantasized all day long driving around. And he would pick up a hitchhiker and do the worst things imaginable to them. I won't say what they are because they're very bad and the sadistic. And I think, oh my God, this is my first client. Why did you give me this person? You know, it's like, oh my God, it is like. But here's the thing: I really learned from him. Actually, empathy was a huge part of his fantasy. He was actually enjoyed the perspective take on what his victims were feeling while he was torturing them. So, is that the kind of empathy we normally think of? No. But I think everyone has a little bit of Schadenfreude, right? When, you know, someone you've been, I don't know, fighting with, and something happens to them, you know, like I remember one time my mom and I was fighting about something, and I stubbed my toe in the middle of the argument. And then my mom said, "See, that's how God punishes you when you lie to me." It's just very happy. I stubbed my toe, man. I think it's short Schadenfreude is normal kind of empathy, but normally people refer to empathy in a very dualistic way that is only about compassion. And I understand that because for sure that is a huge part of how we overcome suffering in life is developing our compassion for ourselves. And then we develop more compassion for others and relinquish our fixation on ourself. So I understand why people think of empathy this way. However, these people really, if they didn't have, they would not enjoy what they're doing if they didn't have some kind of empathy. The other thing is some of them are actually very, lot of long literature on some of these people, like how skilled they are in manipulating other people. And they don't do that by just, you know, being suggestive. They have to use empathy. They have to know something about the people they're trying to manipulate, and then they use that information. So how did they get that information? They got it from empathy. And so one thought I've had about this is that maybe they were like the guy that I worked with. I think it was mainly a cognitive form of empathy that he walked around with like that. However, there is this other form of empathy. I don't know anyone knows how to measure this yet. This kind of more Schadenfreude empathy. It's more like, and it's controversial to say this because, again, this goes against like how people think about empathy. And I'm totally fine when people say, that's not empathy, Ian. Empathy is a good, that's bad. You know, you're terrible. Even you said that. Okay. But, you know, I'm very non-dualistic. I feel like all aspects of mind can be used for good or bad, and then in between, everything. You know, everything is contextual. That's another thing I love about response expectancy theory. It talks about that. Everything is to be found about the nature of hypnotic experiences in the context. And, you know, and also we would say in psychedelic research, the set and setting that people have. So I love that part of this response expectancy theory. I never agreed with this stupid notion that people in the altered state camps should fight the people in the response expectancy camps. I'm happy to say in the United States, we overcame that by having many social hours and drinks with one another. So it was like, we may have different, you know, viewpoints, but we can still enjoy drinks. You got very drunk and have good times doing this. But yeah, I feel the same way about empathy. I think there are aspects of empathy that I would call empathy, which, you know, I think in empathy is in the essence, the attempt to apprehend another person's emotional and mental, maybe also I would throw in spiritual state, you know. And so it's not necessary for it to lead to a pro-social outcome. And some empathy experts agree with this and some not so much. I tend to be in this camp. So that's why I think actually there are examples of classic hypnosis researchers who did work with very amazing amazing work with very dark people, Martin Orne, and also he actually died here in Colorado. Ego State there, Jack Watkins, both interviewed the Hillside Strangler, who was a terrible serial killer. I think his name, Kenneth Bianchi, is his real name. And it's terrible. I mean, actually, I don't recommend anyone look. One of the worst serial killers I ever heard. It's just awful. But both Kenneth Bianchi and Martin Orne noted that he was high hypnotizable. And that was actually part of Kenneth Bianchi's defense. He was trying to say he had dissociative identity disorder, and he did not commit the murders under his host personality. And Jack Watkins took the position in court. This actually was argued in court. Jack Watkins was argued that he was high hypnotizable, but that he was also dissociative identity disorder, and his insanity defense is genuine. He actually, committed this in this malevolent personality state, so to speak. You get involved in dissociative identity disorder, you run into these things pretty commonly. People internalize people that abuse them. Like we were talking about how we take on the default mode network of another person through empathy, or what classically was called transference in psychoanalysis. And so I've treated people like this, even without formal dissociative identity disorder. I think a lot of us are walking around people who said awful things to us, and still we hear their voice, dumbass, stuff like this, but in this case, Jack Watkins said, yeah, this abuse he experienced, then this part of him live and go out and kill these women. It's horrible, really terrible. Also, he had a partner, but we don't need to go into that here. But then Martin Orne said, no, he's high hypnotizable, but he's faking dissociative identity disorder. And actually, Martin Orne had a good case for this, because sort of Jack Watkins, the client, was reporting that. But Martin Orne actually got a listing of the books that Kenneth Bianchi owned prior to being arrested. There actually was a catalog of every book that he owned in his apartment. And there was a good number of books on dissociation and hypnosis in there. How interesting. In fact, at one point, I believe he had attempted to, fake being a psychologist. Like he had fake degree and stuff like this. He was trying to impersonate a psychologist. It's part of, he did many other antisocial things, including faking being a psychologist, if I remember this correctly. But one thing for sure was Martin Orne said that, yeah, he's faking it. And then Jack Watkins said not faking it, but both said he was high hypnotizable. And one of the main reasons for that is if you talk to some of these people, it's clear they go into something like an altered state when they go into that place where they want to kill people. And so like the guy I was talking to, sometimes even ones now or talking more about the psychologists, like Dennis Rader. He is one they called a BTK. He just lived state over from me in Kansas. I never visited him. I have no plan to, but I've read, he talked about going into, I think we called the different modes. And one was called like surveillance mode, like stalking mode, where he would go into this like trance and be like totally obsessed with the victim. And but his brother is super dark stuff we're talking here. I hope no one's totally creeped out, but it's very interesting, very interesting. Particularly like for people who spend a lot of time talking about empathy and positive aspects of compassion, I feel like it's deeply relieving at times. Like why are psychologists in general love to watch these, counselors loves to watch this horrible serial killer stuff. I think it's like non-dual release of, the looking at the dark side of empathy. At least that's the story I'm telling everybody about myself. But but he talked about this, that actually he would go into this like trance-like state where he would just be so obsessed, he would do the craziest things, just like, like totally risk everything he have in his life to stalk these people, enter their homes when they're asleep, and sometimes not even kill them, just like walk around their homes and like plan how he was going to murder them and this kind of stuff. They do this in advance. It's really crazy, like rehearsing it. And then also what they do after they kill the people, and one of the things that helps them to keep from killing further people is rehearsing how it went in the past. So they create this imagination, and they want to have like awful things. Well, they like to have personal objects of the people they killed to enhance their fantasy. There's clearly some kind of fantasy and imagination akin to a hypnotic phenomena in them, and empathy. And I wish it was as simple as saying these people were unhypnotizable, but we do have, actually, if I remember correctly, Orn and Watkins did publish an article on this experience they had of the different positions they took on Kenneth. I think maybe it appeared in the American Journal of Clinical Hypnosis in the 1970s, if I remember this correctly. I remember reading something about this as well. Or maybe just Watkins talks about it in his book, Ego State Theory, with his wife, Helen Watkins. They wrote together. But that's a really fascinating question. I really appreciate all three aspects of that question. To me, this is all mysterious stuff. And whatever you find in your investigation, I would be very thankful that you did the work, whether it agrees with what I just said or not. I feel like this is a great mystery, and Lord knows that it involves the most elusive of mysteries, that one that is transcended spiritual and scientific investigation for thousands of years. What is the self? What is the nature of the self? What is the nature of mind? And so whatever you find, please do the work, and happy to answer any other questions too, and consult or whatever, because whether it agrees with my thinking or not, I think this is a fascinating phenomenon question.
That would actually be amazing. But you were talking about only using pen and paper tests for testing empathy. We're also only using pen and paper. Yeah. And of course, because we're still living in a pandemic, we have to do everything online.
Right.
So we are very limited, I must say.
Well, this is still very welcome and a very valid contribution to the literature, because at this point, there are three scales on that scale that have shown some relationship to either absorption or hypnotic ability. And there's also this unusual finding with the Italian lab, which, I don't know. Maybe that's correct. Maybe absorption and empathy have nothing to do, despite, many years of the absorption finding. And so really, this is very valid contribution to the literature. I'm only mentioning for the future, because in the future, there are actual measures of empathic behavior. So one is called the facial recognition test, where you're asked to judge another person's emotions. And those ones, while they are not paper and pencil tests per se, that can actually be administered via Zoom, I would imagine. You just show the stimuli, and then they have to push a button, with the angry, happy, sad, this kind of thing. And that was one that I was myself always been trying to get to a place where I could do that, or some other kind of empathic behavior test. But what you're doing now is more than enough, and it'd be the most welcome contribution. As a former science editor of the American Journal of Clinical Hypnosis, I will tell you for sure that will like that, no doubt, and also the International Journal of Hypnosis, and actually Consciousness and Cognition. So many journals would love a study about this, and it would be very valid. So please continue doing. Only I'm just mentioning for the future. Yeah.
Right. So my second question is about correlates of hypnotizability. And I'm citing another study by Barrett from 2016 that distinguished between two types of highly hypnotizable subjects, fantasizers and dissociators.
Yes.
I'm sure you're aware of them, but just for the listeners,
Please,
dissociators usually take a longer time to achieve a deep trance state and seem to be less empathic than fantasizers. And fantasizers, on the other hand, enter the hypnotic state faster, which confirms the EIT. However, they also show less awareness of subjects and people in their surroundings, which would imply they are less empathic. Now, when I did the Harvard Group Scale to test my hypnotizability, I did respond to some, but I did not respond to every hypnotic suggestion. For example, you mentioned the fly buzzing. I didn't hear that.
You didn't get the fly?
I never
Keep
had
trying.
I will. I should be highly hypnotizable, but I didn't hear anything. So could you think of factors other than empathy that facilitate hypnosis? For example, being less fixated on reality or the egocentric view of reality? And also, is there a way that I can enhance my hypnotizability?
Okay, there is a general issue you're raising, and there's a very unique, specific, unique idea you have here, which I would want to get to. But we'll get to that second. There's a general area answering your question that's rock solid. This will come from more than 30 years of research in increasing hypnotic ability. And my dad was one of the first people to do that research. Published in Journal of Abnormal Psychology, I believe in 1972 or 4. He showed that using EMG biofeedback can increase people's hypnotic ability. How much does it increase? Does it make a low a high? No. Usually about 3 points on a 12-point scale, for the Harvard and also the Stanford. And so many people did that as well. Elmer Green, who else? Ted Barber, certainly Steve Lynn, and also Irving Kirsch. A lot of the social psychological researchers have shown that using all different kinds of procedures can increase hypnotic ability a modest amount, or a moderate amount. I mean, you can make a low a medium, and you can make a medium a high, basically. And that's only in like 6 to 8 weeks. Extended training may actually go further. I've never seen anybody do it empirically, but I've done it myself. I worked with a person who was a 0 on the Harvard. And I'll never forget, it's so funny, when I finished his testing, he opened his eyes and he said, "Well, I hope that was good for you, because I didn't get anything." It was like we just had sex or something. It was so funny. And I was like, wow, at least he was paying attention, but he didn't get anything. He didn't even get relaxed. Like a lot of those, at least in Ron Pacala's research, have shown will experience some relaxation, even though not much response. But 6 to 8 weeks, and you can increase the score, 3-4 points. And with this guy, he was a 0 at the end. He was a 12 on the Harvard. It's really amazing, I think part of why this is because social psychologists are right. There is a role of being a hypnotic subject, and like any great actor, your acting skills get better. You keep practicing, then you can get. I have to admit, when I first started hypnosis when I was young, I experienced no imagery with it. I just mainly got the change in body sensations, which was great because I was trying to get rid of headaches. And so that's all I got, and I didn't care. It helped my headaches go away. However, after some time of working with people in hypnosis, I started to experience the imagery myself. And also I had lucid dreams, and that phenomena of lucidity and dreams started to merge with my experience of hypnotic dreams. And then suddenly I had imagery very strongly, where at first all I had was like my mom would say, close your eyes, imagine you're on a beach. And so all I see is a wonderful purple blobs that kind of floating like a lava lamp in my mind, So I would say, the general literature shows that everyone, very reliably, you can modify hypnotic ability a modest amount, at least in 6 to 8 weeks. And then my personal experience is if you really devote time, like the guy I was talking about, he had fallen out of a helicopter and had several other back injuries, but the worst was falling out of a helicopter. And his spine was shattered. And they had done everything they could to help him with his back pain, but nothing else could be done. And so literally the orthopedic surgeon and neurosurgeons all tell him, we don't really have any good, spine surgery we can do for you. Even we don't think, things like spine stimulators and other implantable devices will do much. You're already, on the highest level of medication you can get. Even he was on what called an intrathecal pump. So he had an internal pain pump that was distributing the medicine inside his body. And even that wasn't doing it. So there was nothing else they could do. And so they said, why don't you go see this crazy Dr. Ian? And maybe he can, zap the pain out of you. And he had nothing else to do. So he literally came to me very skeptical, saying, not thinking anything would happen. And he was a 0 on the Harvard. And I wondered if he might quit right then and there. But he literally, he had a really good motivation. He wanted to dance for his daughter's wedding. She had just gotten engaged, and he wanted to be able to do one dance with her. The daughter, father dance is traditional American weddings. And he wants to do this. And that was about a year away. And so I said, well, give it the best shot. And like I do with every client, I started with measurement of hypnotic ability and found him to be a 0. And so I started him with biofeedback, which my father's big area of research was matching hypnotic ability level of the client with the methods that should be used for them. They don't use hypnosis without hypnotizables, obviously. So we use biofeedback and got him into able to do that and relax. Then we try and go to mindfulness, meditation, then hypnosis. And then he is doing everything in hypnosis, including some interventional surgical hypnosis he had to do. So I think that is possible, but the general literature is modest. Now, the specific thing you were talking about, I find very interesting. I feel like the magic of hypnosis does come from how we are creating the illusion of self anyway. Like why it seems so illusory is because we're not aware that our normal experience is illusory, And so maybe people who have an advanced insight into the emptiness of self, maybe they have this. It's been my experience, working with gurus in Tibetan Buddhism and other mystical traditions, not just them, also the ayahuasqueros, They talk to the, practitioners of the, rainforest of Brazil and Peru and other Amazonian areas. These people are talking about the same thing, the illusory nature is self. And actually, oddly enough, for ayahuasca, the people have really done this and found, just like hypnosis, default mode network alteration is a big part of ayahuasca. The strangest thing about ayahuasca is they actually reduce default mode network really far down to like almost nothing. Like doesn't look like default mode network, and other structures are involved now. I did ayahuasca one time, and it totally altered my autobiographical self. For about the first 2 hours, it's just amazing, beautiful things were happening. They were so healing to me, to be honest. But then after about 2 hours, I lost the sense of being Ian or anyone else or the person experiencing ayahuasca. It felt like I was in this room of this everything vibrating, and I didn't even have even that much of a story. That's just the little bits that I can share with you. And it's just, every once in a while I would notice these gigantic beings that were dancing around me, you know, and this shaman, you know, he would sing these songs, and I would see his body here, and then my echolocation was so bad that I heard him singing in a different part of the room than he was in. It was so bizarre. My sense of self, bodily self, totally altered, reality, everything. And I lost time, no feeling of the story of myself. And it was really restful not to have a self for a little while. And it's kind of illusory for me to say that, because also that is a story too. I'm telling you the story of not having a self. So I'm just trying to give the best impression. But I think you're onto something there, what you were talking about. I'm trying to remember a scale that I once saw on this. Oh, wait a minute. It's the scale of my friend Peter Grossenbacher. People are starting to come up with these scales. They actually, maybe you would enjoy. I don't know. It's not exactly what you're saying, Petra. Not exactly what you're saying. But one of the classical things we know about people who report, there's just no other way of saying this, who report having lessened their illusion of self, and you know, who maybe have become enlightened, as it would say in Buddhism, in Bön and Hinduism, I guess, you know, is a tendency towards less dualistic thinking. And by the way, I love this because it so much illustrates trance logic. Like, a lot of trance logic is all about non-dualistic thought. You know, like the shaman can be here and his voice can be over here. We can accept this in both hypnosis and ayahuasca, for that matter. You know, or Gabriel Graton can be in Virginia, even though I know he's not. And in that, I can both know that Ole Paulson is talking to me, and he can still be Gabriel Graton. I think this is a classic things that Martin Orne in particular wrote about trance logic. So I'm wondering if maybe scales along the lines of what you're saying that I've seen of non-dualistic thought may be something to look at. My friend Peter Grossenbacher at Naropa has invented this very large scale, and has been doing, you know, psychometric validation of this scale. But at this point, it's still, I think it has like, oh my God, I think it has like 130 items on it or something, you know, you know. But they're trying to kind of get to this measuring, like, people's tendency to experience non-dualistic thought. And so this, I believe, may reflect on this kind of non-dualistic clinging to the self that may allow high hypnotizables to experience amazing, like we didn't talk about it, but I write about it in my paper, Amanda Barnier research, you know, and Rochelle Cox, you know, they did this crazy stuff where they asked, I don't think we could even ethically do this research. Not that I believe it is unethical, but I don't think I would be allowed to do, where they actually ask people to become other people, you know, and they actually lead people with not dissociative identity disorder to imagine that there are other people. And then they challenge this. Have you read this research? It's wonderful, Petra. You'll love. And if you've not met Amanda Barnier and Rochelle Cox, the most wonderful researchers and very good people, I highly recommend you contact them, particularly about this aspect, because they do try to create illusory selves in people. Now, they're not framing it that way, but that's, you know, where I'm talking. They try to get people to actually become other people. And then they bring in a mirror and say, you know, whose face is that in the mirror, you know? And people who really get this, they don't see their own face in the mirror. they see the face of this, person they're role playing, simulating, in hypnosis with the great term coming from Ted Sarban with hallucinated intensity. Now, that was the thing about social psychological theory of hypnosis that has always been misunderstood. People always think, although some people, Ted Barber kind of flirted with this, saying that hypnosis was faked, But the real researchers of social psychology, including later Ted Barber when he got over his little face, I knew him. He was a good man. He was a really good man, really cool guy. Interested in LSD too, by the way. He wrote a book on LSD and hypnosis. But they say that this is not faked behavior. People genuinely experience. So it's not just role playing. It's role playing with Ted Sarban's. Two terms are, one is it's a believed in imagining that comes from his writing, and also with hallucinated intensity. So that's what the self is, a believed in imagining. And so they show that in their research. They get people to be other people, and then who are you seeing in the mirror? The people who really get the phenomena, they see the person they have been hypnotized to be. Also, they get people to come in to the room who know them in their general self, who they are before the hypnosis. And they say, who is this person? And they're like, I don't know, who is this? It's like their wife or their daughter or some close person, and they don't exhibit any signs of knowing. Anecdotally, I once asked if they did psychophysiological part of this, and they were, I think, just starting this. And I think anecdotally, I was told maybe by Rochelle Cox that they don't show the orienting response in the heart rate. Whenever someone comes in the room, then your heart, it's like, oh, there's a so-and-so, how nice, the orienting response. There is my friend, the reliable, whether you realize it or not, your heart does that. Like, you really fall in love with someone, then you feel this, like it does the actual flutters and much more. But even you see someone that's just your good friend, like, oh, how nice. There's a change in your heart rhythm. And if I remember correctly, that was the hypothesis that we're looking at, whether psychophysiologically even that was true, that the body did not actually respond to the loved one. So what that really seems to take, in my view, is a dramatic ability to become less coupled with our fixations on the self. And so that's why I think maybe a paper and pencil test of non-dualistic thinking, I'll just say, I don't know if that's even the right word, non-dualistic experience, maybe is a better way. I think that may get to what you're saying. But I'm actually quite interested in, are you thinking of developing a scale yourself on this?
I don't think I'm skilled to do that, but maybe in the future.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, it's a hard thing to produce your own scale, but it definitely would be interesting.
It would, I would encourage, keep thinking this way. That is a very original hypothesis. And it was one of the wonderful things about hypnosis is, even though it's been around for more than 200 years of research and theorizing, there are still so many fantastic original hypotheses that can be pursued. And I would highly recommend you to do that specific one, because for me, that really gets to some of the ideas that I have developed in this hypnotic self branch of my theory that's in my more recent paper. And if you ever, no matter what you do, I would very much enjoy to collaborate and help in any way that I could. Because, and again, with no feeling about this has to come out the way I predict, I find it equally interesting to be wrong, actually, and be like even the study, from Italy, like I find that interesting, because then I wonder, like, what is the other possible explanation of that? And then maybe it's a true. We need to. It's only because that study contradicts many decades of absorption research that I question. And I don't do so in a way where I'm thinking like they're bad scientists. I'm just wondering if there was some unintentional context set that the personality instruments were not related to hypnosis unintentionally. But anyway, wow, wonderful. Yeah, I think this is a really good idea you have. And if you want to increase your own, just keep practicing. They happen for me. Also, practice other transpersonal methods. You know, like Steve and I, many of our broadcasts are about like a very advanced Tibetan things, you know. And just recently I wrote this whole paper on the Dzogchen. There are many great Dzogchen masters in Europe, particularly in France. In the tradition I study in the France, we have a wonderful teacher, our best teacher from the Bön tradition. His name is Tenzin Namdak Rinpoche. He's now, I think, 95 years old, and he comes to France. And we have a wonderful retreat center there. You can go and learn all of these amazing techniques of Dzogchen, which all of them build upon the foundation of mindfulness meditation, which, you know, we just had a whole issue of the journal of International Journal of Clinical and Experimental Hypnosis on how contemplative techniques are related to hypnosis, but mainly it's about mindfulness. And I do mention mindfulness in my article, but also what lies beyond, you know, like one that called the Togal, where we actually intentionally encounter illusory, that's a wrong word to use here. We intentionally encounter different, what is the right word to use for this? Oh boy. Well, I'll just use the Tibetan word, tigle. Tigle are visual phenomena that you can encounter in this style of meditation that point out directly to you the illusory nature of the world, as well as the illusory nature of the self, and have a direct experience of the non-dualistic way in which the deep nature of our mind really works. And so this is another wonderful area that where hypnosis really becomes very powerful, knowing about hypnosis, because we have lots and lots of research in hypnosis around how people experience what we call positive hallucinations and negative hallucinations, like imagining, you know, like, you know, elephant dancing behind my head right now. You know, imagine like rays of light shining down. Or I don't know, a person attacking me with a baseball bat. You know, we know everything about how that occurs, you know, in terms of hypnosis. People have done great studies like Steve Cosman really show, actually, we use the same structures that we would normally use to see something to create visual hallucinations. That's a short way of describing his research. And so in the Dzogchen, we use this as a way of demonstrating, you know, fantasy is as real as reality. And yet, there are some hypnosis theorists that, like Dzogchen, say that there is something deeper, and which in Dzogchen, which means a great perfection in Tibetan, means there is a nature of mind beyond our fixation of who we think we are and what we think the world is. And that one has perfect knowledge and has a perfect love, you know, perfect wisdom, and has no particular fixation on anything. And even when you thought you were fucking things up, it was sort of playing with you to try and teach you something. Sometimes this thought, even when you're heavily involved in illusion, that actually this was all part of the game of self, where at least I seem to be playing. Oh Lord. I've played many games with myself. But we have something like this in hypnosis too. Now, I've been developing this a little bit, the transpersonal view of hypnosis. I feel there is a deep nature of mind that influences things that happen in hypnosis. And then also there's Milton Erickson. And Milton Erickson talked many times in his writings. Probably one of his most important theoretical concepts was that the unconscious mind had its own wisdom that could be trusted. And a lot of clinical hypnosis and hypnoanalysis reflects this dynamic where you put people in a situation, and rather than try and change the belief with the, I want you to believe this way instead of that way, you just put the person in the situation and let them experience what they are and trust that they will, learn what they need to. Like a classic example might be you get a person who's, let's say, very depressed, to be in a table, imagine sitting at a table, and there's a part of them that's depressed. Okay, now here's the part of you that used to be happy. I want you to have a dialogue with these two parts of you. See what you learn. Oh, wow, there's part of me that knew how to be happy. I was doing all these things in the past, like, I don't know, going bowling or something. I was going dancing at night, and I hung out with my friends, and the depressed one, I don't do anything. Wonder I'm depressed. Maybe we should become friends. You don't even have to say anything. You just get these two parts to dialogue. And so Erickson said the reason you can do that, you don't have to say, okay, there's a part of you that's depressed, and now I'm sitting at the table with you. Sometimes we do put ourselves in that, but mostly I save that for a very special occasion and usually more silly. Or if the person needs some comfort, then I'll say, I'm there with you. But mostly I would like the person to be there in dialogue with themselves. And we trust that the unconscious mind will actually is wiser than the conscious mind. That's what Erickson said. Your unconscious knows. And I believe Erickson had, like many great hypnosis clinicians, understanding that our unconscious mind is something like what we would call the nature of mind. Now, I think the concept of conscious and unconscious probably doesn't fit the Dzogchen model at all, because actually Dzogchen would say that our conscious mind is actually unconscious. And if you want to get conscious, then first you must do things like mindfulness, meditation, lucid dreaming, and learn to actually be awake. Like, it's actually one of the funniest things about research in hypnosis that shows, just like mindfulness meditation, how complex many human behaviors can be exhibited by people who are in trance dreaming-like state, and that things that we would think you have to be conscious for, you don't actually have to be at all. How little consciousness it takes to be a human being is so funny. Dzogchen really says this, that first you must actually become awake. And realize that actually maybe first you must realize you're dreaming in order to become awake. I don't know, maybe that's how it's worked for me. I spend more time realizing how little I am awake, But yeah, I just would encourage, our tradition of hypnosis is, good, over 200 years old. I tend to start it with Abbe Faria in 1819. There were some other people like Marquis de Persiguier. He understood the psychological nature of animal magnetism. Benjamin Franklin was onto some stuff too. But I'd like to start it with Abbe Faria in 1819. So we had over 200 years of this. Dzogchen has at least 1,200 years, and quite likely the tradition says many thousands of years. And even there's some cave art that suggests this. So we're talking 200 years versus many thousand years. Plus, they're really nice people. They're fun to hang out with. And if you're looking for high hypnotizable, they're all there. Study that you won't find them in Dzogchen communities.
So I'm aware of the time, but I also know that Petra has an interesting wildcard question.
Oh, yeah, let's hear it.
is a little,
Yeah.
I don't know how much of an answer you're going to be able to give, Ian. You've already been very generous with your time, but I do
I love
want
this.
to, yeah, it's great fun, isn't it?
Me too. I just
But I
love
do want
listening to
to,
you.
but I do want to give Petra the chance to, and you also, Dr. Ian, to hear this wildcard
Yeah.
question, just see how this strikes you. So please, Petra.
Yeah, so for my last question, I thought of something completely different.
Yeah.
And it's actually about water fasting, because
Oh,
4 years ago, I did
Mm.
a 3-week water-only fast, and
Oh.
it completely changed my mind, as cheesy as that sounds. But
It sounds wonderful to me. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I didn't expect to do 21 days, but I don't know how I managed it. But, you know, if you set your mind to something,
Yes.
you really can endure hard stuff. But I was at a really dark place at the time, and I just had no motivation to do anything. And I just felt sick of being alive, you could say. And I wanted to do that to kind of reset my brain, because I don't know if you've done other detoxes, because water fasting is a kind of dopamine detox. And there was also the time when I got into meditation, and I've been meditating daily ever since. And I'm so grateful that I'm doing this, because I never thought I'd be into it that much. But you know, the amazing thing is also, during the first few days when you start a water fast, your brain constantly thinks about food, and then there's just a switch, and then you have so much more energy for something else, and you can refocus and redirect your thoughts. And it was just an amazing experience. And I've been doing some shorter fasts and longer fasts in between. You can't do them all the time, of course, but yeah, I've really enjoyed all of them. So I was wondering, do you have any experiences with all kinds of detoxes, like dopamine detoxes or water fast or stuff like that?
Yeah, you definitely the dopamine. The dopamine detox is very much traditionally related to practice of ayahuasca in sacred ceremony. And so when I did ayahuasca, I guess it was 2018, I think. Yeah, probably 2018. And so they give me this, diet, what you may or may not eat and this kind of thing. Also, though I had not done this, I have read, many accounts and biographies of great Tibetan and Bhutanese and Nepalese saints that undergo water fasting and other related dietary restrictions as part of their practice of very powerful techniques. So even one that I practice myself, which we talk about in one video, Tumo meditation, there is a lot of potential dietary restrictions and strange processes that you could do. I almost other people have written about it publicly, so I'll say one of them is consuming one's own urine, actually. That's very, and also applying to the skin. So when I read these things, and the one that I experienced was, the ayahuasca one. And for me, engaging in that kind of thing is very much like how I respond to sensory restriction. And actually, that was my dad's first ever study on hypnosis, was sensory restriction, and using sensory restriction as a way of increasing hypnotic ability. And that's the way I think of all of these things. And as we work on the unity of our mind-body discipline, then this is what hypnotic ability is. It is about our control over our mind-body relationship and our understanding of its illusory nature. It experientially increased. No one has to tell you, this is an illusion, you suddenly have the ability to alter the self without even knowing how or why, or even understanding conceptually, oh yeah, this means the self is an illusion. You're just able to do the things like, wake up in your dreams, and override sleep anesthesia and get up and walk around. I had clients who can drive their car while they're asleep, and one was arrested for a DUI, actually. I was actually trying to stop that. But it's actually a strange ability, right? And yeah, that's the way I understand that. And as all of these procedures are about altering our transpersonal experience of the self and the world. And so we have all these expectations around eating, and Lord knows, often they're not healthy. In my case, and there are just that. There are just expectations. And when people undertake, particularly for sacred purposes, I think, these kinds of restrictions of diet, but also like sitting in the dark room. Like I belong to a tradition where we do sensory deprivation for Dzogchen practice of Togal and all kinds of things, and lucid dreaming. And there's diet part of that too. And all of these things really help, I believe, to overcome our normal expectations. So we have this expectation of I eat this, and I'll experience this kind of happiness. And if I don't eat this, then I will not be happy. And yet, when we engage in this, we can be very happy. I've been very strict vegan at times. I'm not currently, but for about 20 years, I was a fairly strict vegan until someone took me to eat sushi, and then that kind of ended it. But there is something so wonderful about that, engaging in these processes of treating the body in a sacred way. Also, this is like a set and setting thing too, right? It's like your idea about why you were doing it may have a lot to do, then become more integrated with what your somatic experience is. So there's both a natural experience, I think, but that experience is also altered by your expectation of what's happening. So I'm curious to ask you, what were you feeling that water fasting, why did you want to do?
Well, I felt like I had lost joy in small things. And I was also eating really bad. So I've heard a lot of positive things about it, but I really wanted to reset my thoughts in a way, because if you don't spend time thinking about food, preparing food, buying food, cooking and stuff like that, you have so much more time to think about your state of mind and how you feel at the moment. And you also become so much more in one with your body, I think, because you start listening to your body signals because you're experiencing hunger, but then you consciously flip that and you say, nope, I'm not going to eat now. And I think it really strengthens your frontal lobes, like taking cold showers, for example. And
oh yes, yeah.
I've started doing that recently, and it's still really bad. But
yeah, right.
Also, yeah, it sucks every time you get in, but after that, I feel refreshed and I feel like it's strengthening my frontal lobes again, and I'm all about that. So it was just an amazing experience just to see how you can shift your thoughts, because when you meditate, for example, it's also about catching your thoughts if you're not focusing on your breathing, for example. I mean, there are so many other techniques, but I think it also helped me a lot. Sorry, go on.
No, I just wanted to say that there's a profound way in which it sounds like you were also working with your somatosensory cortex, not just the, I agree, you're strengthening the will, no doubt. And also the story of your will, you know, in the hippocampus, and then also your bodily expectations, you know, in the neuromatrix and the parietal cortex. You're really gaining insight and direct insight. And so, by the way, I salute you in that your approach to this phenomena is experiential. There was a terrible time in the hypnosis world, which I'm hoping I'm helping to end, when you would go to talk to all the leaders of the fields of hypnosis, including Ted Barber and my father, and you would ask them, have you ever been hypnotized? And they would say no. I was like, how can you be an expert in something you've never experienced? Well, I am a low hypnotizable. I am a sound scientist, you know, and I cannot be hypnotized because I am too critical a thinker. And that actually disagrees with the real science of hypnosis. It's so stupid. You know, even Ted Sarbin back in the 1940s showed that measures of verbal intelligence correlate positively with hypnotic ability. And suggestibility has fucking nothing to do with this. Well, non-hypnotic suggestibility. And so I salute you in that you are investigating personally the phenomena. And I highly encourage you to keep drawing insight from that into your work. I don't feel that it's necessary. And by the way, none of those people I mentioned felt it was necessary either. They just kept it on the down low to keep your personal investigation of your spirituality, of your health, your mind-body relationship, however you want to think of this. Draw from it and bring it deep into your work. That's what I have done, you know, and most of the people that I know that have been great hypnosis researchers have done the same. You know, they all came from things. In my father's case, all of his research is, not all, but mostly is on psychosomatic things, like how people get psychosomatic illness. And his great insight was that it comes from being either a low hypnotizable or a high hypnotizable. And that was his own personal experience. And I don't think I busted on him. I think he would be fine with me saying that. And so, yeah, I would please continue doing that and enjoy the benefit of it. And one of the wonderful things about being a hypnosis researcher is how so many hypotheses, like I heard you say today, and even this phenomena of water fasting, I'm not aware of anyone actually doing this experiment. Like there are related ones in sensory deprivation that actually my dad did, and Ari Barabash did one at a polar research station in Antarctica. I don't think anyone has done fasting of any sort and looking to see if that increases hypnotic ability. That would be great. Why don't you do that? Do that. Do everything you're saying. You know, these are all original and cool ideas. Please do them. I humbly request for you to do that. Please.
Well, that is a big request, because
yeah, of course.
doing experiments with fasting is generally so hard, because I don't know, there's this weird stigma that you are going to die after 2 weeks of not eating, and it's just not true. And there are so many health benefits as well, but people are just willingly ignoring them, I think. But maybe that will change in the future. I will try to do my best, because that's really something I'm really passionate about.
Maybe you can do something like approximates it, you know, like just, you know, some lesser form of dietary restriction, you know, like the ayahuasca cleanse, you know, or something, you know.
For sure.
I don't know, you know, I just think the really, truly powerful part of the yogic tradition is dietary restriction. It even gets very bizarre. Like I mentioned the urinary retention practices and things. So I don't know. I if it's very important in Dzogchen, my guess is in other mystical traditions, you know, ayahuasqueros and things. Best guess I have is that it really is important, and that it might be that it increases hypnotic ability, because that's what sensory deprivation does. It's really good. I think really good. You should try. Maybe not the most extreme, or I don't know. Maybe you can do that. You may have trouble finding an IRB that will allow that, but other forms maybe that will allow.
Well, this has been such a fascinating conversation. Thank you both. Thank you, Dr. Ian, for being so generous with your time. And thank you also, Petra. It's just so wonderful to hear you two discussing these things like this.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Steve. I had to say, I watched so many of your interviews based on your interviewing skill. And I feel like this particular one even show how you allow space to have things happen. And so I think that also is a testament to you in how you allow the space for this. And certainly I'm most appreciative of Petra for your questions and for your interest. And I generally, not expecting, but I generally want to encourage and empower you. You must go. I believe that many of the ideas you have, if you explore them, you will take completely original insights will come from these things. And I just really want to encourage and thank you for initiating with these questions and your interest. And no matter what you find, I think it will be good.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Steve, also for giving me this opportunity. When I was texting you, I never imagined that this would be possible, but now here we are. And it was amazing talking to you. It is so fascinating to just listen to you talk about all these different topics and connecting them. And I feel like I got a better grip of your theory in general, because it's such a broad theory of so many facets and schools. And I really had to think about the theory for a few days before I was like, now I'm getting it. But you really helped explaining today. So thank you so much for that.
Oh, thank you so much, Petra. I really appreciate it.
Dr. Ian Wickramasekera and Petra Tauchner, thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you for listening to another Guru Viking podcast. For more interviews like these, as well as articles, videos, and guided meditations, visit www.guruviking.com.